So welcome back from your cruise. How was your cruise, Hirsch?
It was wonderful, Nancy. I was on the Podcasters Cruise, Podcasters at Sea. Um, it was a very exciting group of, podcast hosts, guests, professionals, and obviously, as we know from, having our own podcasts, uh, you know, podcasters are kind of the category of professional in a way, but they're from all walks of life. So you meet people who do all kinds of things, who have shows about every possible topic, and it's just very invigorating. And then being at sea and going to some wonderful places. Fortunately, um, it was after the dreadful hurricanes that had taken place, and so it was a little bit bittersweet, with the sense that there had been some devastation taking place in Tampa and on the west coast of Florida. Um, so it was not without its little bit of dose of reality that we face with climate change and all of the crazy stuff that's going on. Um, but it really was good to get a little shift of perspective and a little bit of networking, meeting new people, talking about our shows, and just comparing notes. So it was
Yeah,
great.
good stuff. Well, I marked this episode today as Selling the Truth, which I know actually I marked it as What's the Truth? Your book is just coming out called Selling the Truth. And I understand through the end of October, you have a special deal. But before you announce what that deal is, I am curious to know a bit more about the book. And what prompted you to write it?
That's a great question, Nancy. I appreciate you asking it. I had never written a book. I had written across so many different mediums. I had written movies. I had written thousands and thousands of press releases and bios, and done copywriting, written ads, and written stand up comedy. And I felt like if I were going to write a book, I wanted it to be a nonfiction book. And nonfiction could be anything that's true, anything that isn't made up. And that alone just triggered in me this question of, well, wait a minute, what is true?
Yeah.
I don't know what's true. We live in a post-truth world, and we hear that quite a bit. And if the truth is subjective, if the truth is relative, how am I even going to write a nonfiction book? And to be honest, for a little while, I was like, well, maybe I should just write fiction, because then I have an out. But what it occurred to me was the truth, ultimately, the inarguable truth, is something that we have, and we should use it when we're trying to sell things to people. We talk a lot about sales and messaging on our know and sell pointers. Well, all we have to sell ultimately is the truth.
Wow, that is a powerful sentence. All we have to sell is the truth. I've had so many conversations lately, Hirsch, with people who are in our area of expertise, the marketing sales continuum or messaging sales continuum. And the people, of course, that I am drawn to and are likewise drawn to me are people who share my particular point of view. And that point of view is that uh, there is a lot of hype around marketing, that it seems to be what people are perceiving as the norm, that one exaggerates, embellishes, spins the truth, so to speak. And of course, as I'm talking to people, we are all saying that's not the way we want to go. And there clearly is a segment of the population, I don't know if we're the majority, but there certainly is a large group of people who are very uncomfortable and squirm with this idea that they have to exaggerate, embellish, and spin the truth. Uh, and so hence it's so important to be able to have support for a different way of approaching messaging and sales.
Yeah, and the funny thing is there's a chapter in the book about spin doctors and BS artists and the other type of, siren songs that we often get sucked into and need to avoid. And what I try to point out is the futility of deception. You know,
Mm.
it may seem like a short-term benefit. Oh, the audience wants this. I'll tell them it's this. And then by the time they figure out that it's not this, I'll be long gone. And, that's kind of the snake oil salesman. The BS artist will say, will actually just want so badly to be telling the truth or be right that they've convinced themselves that what they're saying is true. And so sometimes they're harmless, sometimes they're very dangerous, but either way, they honestly believe they've convinced themselves that this is true. But as we know, that doesn't make the product better. It doesn't make the product better to convince ourselves of something that is not true.
To me, it goes back to the fundamental schism between transactions versus relationship. And there are people for whom a quick transaction is the name of the game, and everything they're doing is headed towards that transaction. They may want the relationship after the transaction. I'm not saying that they are anti-relationship, but they're pro-transaction first. And to me, this is a turnoff, not only for me personally, but for the clients that I serve, because we are looking for a genuine connection. Hence, that's why selling the truth is so appealing.
Thank you, Nancy. And I think that um, the fact that we are looking for connection and that we acknowledge that is not indicative of people who are being transactional necessarily only wanting that. I think that a lot of us just fall into habits and we get used to this idea that selling isn't personal or that it doesn't branding isn't personal. We don't have a human relationship with this and that, and then computers and AI and all this other utility that surrounds us is somehow what life really is about. And I think that in writing the book, what I tried to do was explain how it's possible to fall into these traps, but it's also possible to climb out of them.
I love what you said about not realizing or maybe discounting that personal aspect to our selling and our branding, our messaging, because it's all personal, especially when you are a solopreneur or you are the owner of a business. You are being watched. You cannot escape people's eyes and you cannot escape people's judgments. And hence, if you behave in a way that is transactional, impersonal, very much, about me and what can I get out of it, that reputation is what you are forming. And unfortunately, it takes quite a bit to undo. Hence, it's very important that you be true to your message, true to your brand. And hence, the selling is just, again, an extension of what you've already created. I like the differentiation, Hirsch, between marketing being a message for the masses, for the numbers, and selling being an individualized approach. But they have to be the same, or there's a huge disconnect and it confuses the buyer.
Yeah, I made a note while you were saying that because this sounds like the kind of catchphrase that a teacher would maybe use in school, but it stuck with me, which is that it's easier to be true than to undo. Is
Oh,
that
nice.
that, and that's based on what you were saying. I just moved the words around, but the idea is that the road back from all of that deception is long and tangled, and And I think that that's another point that I try to make in the book, which is, we've all heard the quote that that telling the truth is easy, leaves you so much less to remember.
Yeah.
uh, you know the fact is that it's so clear, the path back to where we came from, when we keep the things straight, and we're just telling people what's really what we know to be true. And that's another kind of final point for this little know and sell pointers, is that what we know to be true is very simple and very basic. And so my tip today is, when you're trying to discern and make sense of everything that's out there, start small. Start with very simple things and get in the habit of acknowledging those very, very simple truths. And if you engage with people who may have differences of opinion and so forth, those very, very simple truths will start to seem very uniting and kind of bringing us all together. And ultimately, what I want for the book, and what I want for all of us as a species, is to get along better, to differ and argue less. And if we can agree on some very, very simple truths, we can create a new paradigm, I think, for conversation.
I love it. I'm just going to piggyback on that idea of simple and basic. As a psychologist, of course, I'm aware of what's called defense mechanisms. There are lots of them, starting with things like denial. And what I have discovered is that when people are not telling the truth, they're deceiving themselves to begin with. But then they try to deceive the other person by their behavior, what they say or do. And when it's a simple, basic truth, denial falls away. The embellishment is not needed. You don't have to minimize. You don't have to make it grandiose. It can stand for what it is. And again, this is just a psychological truism that, the simple, basic truth, guess what? It does sell.
Great point. Great point. And ultimately, that's my favorite point, which is that the truth does sell. So that if you're really worried about what's going to work and what's going to get you the result that you're after and what's going to make things flow, it's always going to come back to that.
Yeah.
And yes, we learn it as kids, but the fact is, we also know that life is more complicated than we thought it would be. The wrenches that get thrown into the works, the curveballs, all that stuff. And so the hope is that, the simpler we keep it, the smoother we'll sail.
Right. Well, we don't have time to go into some more questions. I would like to explore a bit more about you and the book. I have read it. To me, it really touched my heart. I found myself very much enjoying it. It gave me a very wonderful inside view of you, Hirsch, which, you're a beautiful human being.
Oh,
But since we don't have time to go into it, though, I do want to just let the people know that there is a special offer. Would you just briefly share what that is?
yes. So for those people buying the book before the end of this month, essentially October 31st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern, you will get a copy of my next book free. So it's really quite a wonderful deal, because if you love this book, you have the new one to look forward to when it comes out, and you get that free. And then if you hate this book, then what are the odds of a writer as gifted as I am actually turning out two terrible books in a row? So one would presume that it's got to be better than the first one.
Amen.
And so that's my offer to those of you listening. And you can find the information at hirschrepun.com. I think it's also at sellingthetruthbook.com, but I'm not sure if that's been hooked up yet. But you'll find it.
Okay. And we
And
can put that underneath. Yeah, for sure. So anyway, this has been another edition of Know and Sell Pointers. I'm Dr. Nancy Zare. I am the Sales Whisperer.
And I'm Hirsch Repun, your personal branding consultant.
To your sales success.